Good tidings, everyone. This is Michael Gobier from the Hey, it's Enrico Palazzo Fantasy Baseball Podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes, and while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 304, Zapped Movie Review. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. This week, my turn to nominate a film for us to watch and review. So to the surprise of no one, I opted to go for a raunchy 80s comedy. Oh, what a big surprise. So we had to watch Zapped from 1982 starring Scott Baio. But before we get to the movie, what pop culture have you been able to take in over the past week, my friend Derek?
Hey, Chris. Well, I was able to finally, so I think I had teased last week. I said I didn't have any documentaries, but I was watching a docuseries and I got a chance to finish it.
Nice. So
I finished watching the 6-episode docuseries on Netflix called Mr. McMahon.
Hold on. But does this mean you actually watched a documentary?
For 40 days and 40 nights, he watches documentaries. He likes to learn about the world. It's Derek's Documentaries. Derek's Documentaries.
You're not getting away that easy. We got to play the song.
Enough. We hadn't had a chance to play the song in a while.
There you go.
So yeah, this docuseries was called Mr. McMahon. It was about Vince McMahon, the head of wrestling, WWF, WWE, and then all that stuff. Again, I'm not really a big wrestling guy, so I did not know. Well, I don't want to say I didn't know anything, but there was a lot that was presented in this documentary that was new to me. Now, the big the biggest pieces, especially near the beginning, where it talked about like WrestleMania 1 and WrestleMania 2 and like some of those big wrestling events and the Montreal Screwjob, like some of those things I knew about because I'd watched documentaries about the wrestlers. There had been like, there's various series that are doing like behind the wrestling or behind the mat or the dark side of wrestling, something like that. I've watched a whole bunch of those. So I'm familiar now with some of the more famous or infamous wrestlers, but I didn't really know much about Vince McMahon, and this obviously focuses on him. Now, one of the things that was really interesting is it's produced by The Ringer. The guys at The Ringer, I listen to their podcast. I pump them all the time. I promote them all the time on our show. They're the guys that that started the 30 for 30 documentary series. So they really know how to do sports documentaries really well. And they had actually been working on this docuseries for years, and apparently in the last few years Vince McMahon's had a lot of issues that have come out in the press with allegations of like assault and sex trafficking and bribery and like hush money, and so some of that had already come out when they were doing this initial documentary, and so they asked the participants about it, including Vince McMahon. And then as more stuff started happening, they had to actually go back and redo a whole bunch of interviews because they wanted to get people's reaction, like the people that they had interviewed for the original documentary. They wanted to go back to those people and say like, okay, now that these new allegations have come forward, like what are your thoughts? And so I guess things have happened over the last few years on a couple of different occasions. So every time they get ready to release this documentary over the last few years, they've had to stop production, go back, do new interviews, and get a new perspective. And some people are like hard and fast. They're like, Vince is my man and he can do no wrong. And other people are like, well, I'd always heard grumblings and now it sounds like what I've been hearing was true. So it's interesting how that like the last episode, especially, they get to a point where they're like, okay, this happened in the last 6 months. And then when they went back to re-interview, a whole bunch of people were like, no, we're not willing to do any more interviews about this, where, no comment. And even Vince McMahon himself obviously got to a point where he was absolutely unwilling to go back on camera. So it was interesting how up to date it was. And they've even been saying that depending on how things play out over the next year, they may actually even do another episode to tack it on. Because right now it's 6 1-hour episodes. They may actually go back and do a 7th episode as sort of like an epilogue, like, here's what's happened since we finished. So from that point of view, it was a really interesting documentary to see it almost unfolding in real time. But again, you're more of a wrestling fan than I am, so you probably would enjoy it if you haven't seen it. I talked to a few of my friends that are real sports nuts, like my brother's a real sports nut, and he said he watched it as much as he enjoyed it. He's like, there wasn't anything in that documentary I didn't already know. So I think if you're a big wrestling fan, it's not necessarily going to present something you weren't already aware of, but to the casual person like me, it was 6 hours of new content. So
yeah,
pretty good.
That's probably the idea behind it, was to bring that to the forefront for more mainstream people like yourself that don't follow wrestling. I was a bit of a wrestling fan, yeah, but it was like back in the 80s, you know. And the thing with Vince McMahon was like, because he played up all that stuff, you know, like all that, you know, fake storylines and all that stuff. So with him, half the time you don't even know, is half of his stuff fake? Is it not fake? It's just like,
they talk about that a lot. Like how much are the lines blurred between his character, Mr. McMahon, the chairman, versus Vince McMahon, the person. And so again, they leave a lot of it up to the viewer to decide, but they try and present it. But even in the documentary, some of the people, again, because they had to go back to them, they had shown some of the participants the documentary because they were ready to release it. And then in light of new evidence that had come out, new allegations, they didn't release it to the public, and they went back and reshot stuff. But because a lot of the participants had a chance to see the initial cut of the documentary, they were a lot more critical and a lot less cooperative with the interviewers towards the end of the series, where they're like, well, you showed us this thing, and we think you have a lot of gotcha moments in there, and a lot of things are one-sided. So it was an interesting take sort of towards the end of the last episode. And then and I know we normally do documentaries last, but I had that one first on my list. The other one is I actually had a chance to sit down and watch a newer movie. I'm not really a horror movie guy, but being October, there's a ton of horror movies on TV. There are, and my wife knows the kind of movies I like and don't like, and so she's like, "Oh, you might like this. This is about vampires." So it's based on the Stephen King book called Salem's Lot, and they did a remake because I think it was originally done like years, like 20, 30 years ago.
I think
late
70s.
It's like I think it was like a TV miniseries. I don't even think it was an actual movie, but
it was one of his first adaptations. Yeah.
So they redid it. It was done in 2024. It just came out on HBO this month, so I had a chance to watch it. I did not recognize really anybody in the cast. There was a couple of people that I'm like, is that someone I recognize? No, that's not true. Alfie Woodward. Oh yeah. She's in it. Small part. And again, there's with many Stephen King stories, he has like family dynamics and little kids. One of the little kids is the boy that plays Homelander's son in The Boys, the TV series. So I'm like, other than that, I was like, I didn't know who the main male lead was, the female lead, like a lot of supporting casts, which is nice because then you never know. Is this person, if Brad Pitt's in the movie, he's not getting killed in the first 20 minutes. So, that kind of thing. So, but anyway, it was decent. It was a decent vampire movie. But to your point, it's clearly based on an early Stephen King work. It's definitely not that I'm a huge connoisseur of his works in general, but I'm familiar with a lot of his movies. Definitely not his best. It's very straightforward. The plot is basically A becomes B becomes C becomes D, like very straightforward, but it was entertaining. I mean, I like vampire movies, so I gave it 2 hours. It was decent. I would probably give it like a C+ or a B-. It was fine. So those are my two things. I saw Salem's Lot and I watched the Mr. McMahon documentary on Netflix.
We should maybe do a topic on vampire movies sometime. Not even a top 5.
Ooh,
just
I like
talk
that.
about them. That might be something to just.
That would be a real good one.
Yeah. So Derek, as you know, when I'm not doing this podcast with you talking about old TV shows, movies, I spend some time on a college campus as a professor. Hard to believe because I'm just such a dork, I guess. So I had this student, he comes in my office the other day and he sits down. He's like, "Can I talk to you for a minute, Professor?" "Oh yeah, what's going on?" And he's like, "I'm taking this film course." And he goes, "I like this course so much." It's like a general education, like a liberal arts course. Mm-hmm. And he was like, "I like it so much, I want to start up a classic film appreciation club on campus."
Nice.
And so I'm like, "Well, tell me about this course you're taking. Like, what's some of the old movies you're watching?" And he's like, "Well, I had to watch this one. It was really good. It was an old silent film about like World War I and the big ship." I'm like, "Oh yeah, Battleship Potemkin." He's like, yeah, that's it. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm familiar with it. 1925, Russia, directed by Sergei Eisenstein." And I start talking about the Odessa Steppe sequence and all that. And he's like, "Wow, you really know this movie? I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, we also had to watch this other, it was like a weird movie. It was like all abstract. Had all these weird looking sets and stuff. And I'm like, oh, it sounds like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Oh.
And he's like, yeah, it is the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I'm like, yeah, it's from Germany, 1920. Like, the director's Robert Weiner. It's a great film. So the student just looks at me.
Yeah.
And he's like, would you like to be the faculty mentor for our new film club? So I accepted. So I'm the new faculty mentor for the Film Appreciation Club on campus. It's like a perfect fit. It really is. I'm the old guy who knows movies, right? So I'm looking for that.
That's not where I thought this was going. I thought you were going to say, he said, I had to watch this really old movie, and it was going to be like something from the mid-90s that you were going to like fall off your chair.
Yeah.
There was this movie, it was a Brad Pitt one called Fight Club and something, you know?
It was old.
Yeah, it was called Pulp Fiction. It's its old classic. It's so old, and you were going to be like, oh my God. That's where I thought this story was going. I'm glad it didn't.
But, me too. I'm glad it didn't either, because I'm old, but I'm not that old. But I do have this.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
So I was thinking, Derek, since we're doing Zapped this week, and we're going to get to our review in a minute, I thought I'd do a Scott Baio joke for you. Okay? So Scott Baio walks into a bar, and the bartender says, "You're early. Your shift doesn't start for an hour."
That sounds about right.
Yeah, he hasn't gotten jobs in a while. One thing I've always appreciated about you is your sense of humor.
We got a bleeder!
36, does that include me?
Because if you've seen one, you've seen them all.
You know, man, I'm gonna take one more turn around the horn here.
Can fart jokes.
Fine, be in the
Why?
Hey, try to just on your way through the parking lot.
Join the club.
What day did the Lord create Spinal Tap, and why couldn't he rest on that day too?
All right, my friends. So, although I nominated this movie to be reviewed on the podcast, it was actually you, Derek, that put me onto this idea. Because for a long time, for years, this movie was just not available anywhere. You could not watch Zapped. It wasn't on any of the streaming services. You couldn't rent it or buy it like on Amazon or Apple or Cineplex or any of those movie services where you can buy movies online. It was like one of the lost 80s comedies. You just couldn't get a hold of anywhere. And then a few weeks ago, you mentioned that this movie Zapped was suddenly available on Amazon Prime. So I had no choice but to jump at the opportunity to get us to watch it and review it here on the show. Now, I'm assuming that you are like the rest of us, and you haven't seen this movie for like ages. So going back and watching it, any first impressions?
Yeah, well, let me give you a little history of my relationship to this movie. Sure. So I saw this movie, as I mentioned on many episodes, when I was younger. I used to spend summers with my cousins who were the same age as I am, and we used to rent all sorts of inappropriate movies, like as 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds. This was one that we definitely came out in 82. We probably saw it in 83. So we would have been like 8 or 9 years old, which was probably a little too young because there's a lot of boobs in this one. But there was enough humor in it that we could relate to some of it. So we had a good time with it. And so I always remembered it fondly. And I remember renting it and re-renting it a few times, like in the 80s. And then that's it. Like I probably haven't seen the movie since 86, 87, 88, somewhere in that neighborhood. But it's one of those ones that it just checks a lot of boxes for me. So it's sort of living for free in my brain all these years later. And I mean, you know me, I love comic books and superhero movies. So it's a teenager who gets superpowers essentially. And it's, he uses his powers to take girls' shirts off. I'm like, what's not to like about that? And so anyway, no, I had this as like a movie that I remembered enjoying as a little kid. It's a movie I remembered fondly. But to your point, it had been 40 years since I had seen it. So when I went back to watch it, which I did right away, and I was like, oh boy, I hope this isn't one of those things like where you have nostalgia goggles on and you remember it being really good, and then you watch it as a grown-up and you're like, oh my God, does this suck? And then your memory of it just shatters in real time. But this was the opposite for me. I watched it and I thought not only did it hold up to my memory, but I liked it even more because there was so much in this movie that I understood now that I never got as a little kid. The whole subplot with them making the marijuana and all that, none of that made any sense to me when I was watching as a little kid. I had no concept of it. Like, so much of this movie, well, not so much, but parts of this movie were just over my head as a little kid. And watching it recently, this last couple of weeks here as an adult, understanding what it's about and it, like, yeah, I had the nostalgia goggles on for sure. But I thought it was a real treat to go back and watch. It wasn't perfect, and we'll talk about it, but it was a real treat. I really enjoyed it.
So my history with this movie is pretty long too, like you. I actually saw this movie in the movie theater.
Wow.
I was 12 years old. So the thing was, back then, and especially here in Canada, like, we didn't have the same movie rating system that evolved in the later 80s. So there was G, PG, parental guidance, and then there was something that was called adult entertainment, and then R-rated movies. And this whole category, this whole rating category of adult entertainment basically meant, like, the movie had adult content in it, but it wasn't like a hard R rating. So I don't even know what the rules were back then for letting kids in to see movies. Like, but apparently 12-year-olds had no problem at all getting into the theater to see it. Because I remember I went with my best friend and a girl. I guess you could say she was like my girlfriend. I don't know if 12-year-olds really have girlfriends. I guess you think they do. I don't know. But I will tell you this. 12-year-olds had no issue getting into the movie theater to see movies with lots of naked boobs back in the 80s. It was just a thing. And because I saw this film then. And then I also then started to watch it on VHS and on the movie channel. I remember one time, it might have been late 80s. I've always been a baseball fan my whole life. And I remember when Turner Broadcasting System, TBS, came out. Mm-hmm. And it was a big thing on cable because we didn't have all that many channels back in those days. And when TBS came out, it was one of the first cable channels. And they would, play old movies and stuff. And one of the things that they used to play was the Braves baseball games, the Atlanta Braves baseball games, because Ted Turner owned the team. And so I would watch, like, some of the games because there wasn't a lot on TV and I liked baseball. So I remember one night watching the Braves game and a guy in the stands was holding up a sign that said, "Zapped on TBS tonight." And I was like, what? And after the game, Zapped was on and he had, like, seen it in the TV guide or something like that and had put it up. So I recorded it on VHS off TBS. And that was the version that I watched most of the time, like, for the years to follow. So it was censored. So a lot of my memories of this film were the censored version of it. So a little bit eye-opening for me watching it this time. But like I say, getting into the theater, I remember a lot of it though from when I saw it, when I got into the theater. But getting into the theater as a 12-year-old to watch this, man, it just sums up the fact perfectly that the 80s were just a completely different time.
Oh, like, yeah.
Sensibilities were different, movies were different. And I think nowhere is that more evident than in this genre of sex comedies. Because I was thinking about it and I'm like, when you think about it, this was an entire genre. It was like a subcategory of movies. This raunchy teen sex comedy. It was a thing in the 80s.
Well, and this one wasn't even really raunchy by those standards, but
it was definitely one of those sex comedies.
Oh, yeah. There was unnecessary boobs all over the place.
I think if you go back, like, I think Porky's in 1981 usually gets attributed as the catalyst that sort of launched this whole genre of film. I'd argue it actually started with Animal House in 78. That's what I think. But, regardless of where it started, this idea of the sex comedy was a big thing, but it lasted the whole decade of the 80s. Probably died right around the end of the decade, right? Like, I'm pretty hard pressed to think of any sex comedies from the 90s. Can you think of any?
I think you're right. I think it's sort of the genre itself eventually died out, and then eventually we got the internet, and it was just part of the reason that some of these movies were making any money at all. Is it was just like, let's get some very attractive young ladies who are willing to take their tops off. It's like, well, once you have the internet, like
in 1982, there was no internet.
No,
there was no, like, you couldn't, like, watch like X-rated porn films unless you went to a movie theater. In 1982, there wasn't even like home video. So the only way you couldn't like get magazines, you had to be 18 to buy like Playboy magazine or something. So the only way in 1982 that, younger people could see boobs or anything like that was in these kind of movies. Like that was it, so it was a big thing then. And like you said, they just kind of died. And I think they tried to reboot this whole genre with American Pie in 99. There was a few more after that too, like Superbad comes to mind, but I think
even The Hangover to a certain extent.
Yeah, they tried
from this. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it was just pretty much a thing in the 80s, Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with the sensibilities of the 80s.
Oh, absolutely.
And how they changed into the 90s and stuff like that. So now even though the sensibilities kind of changed into the 90s and stuff, it didn't stop me from rewatching the old 80s comedies. So I remember when I was in university in the 90s, I had movies like this, like Zapped on VHS, and I subjected my college roommates to watching these movies over and over and over again with me. Like I think they probably hated me for it. But and then I don't know if it was the evolution of DVD and then streaming, but maybe even more to just the fact that my life got busy and stuff. I got married and had kids. Like I just kind of didn't get a chance to watch a lot of those old 80s movies like I used to for a while there. And so Derek, that's why I like doing this podcast with you so much. It gives me a chance to go back and watch these old movies I haven't seen in years. And they were a big part of me, growing up. So I want to ask you, Derek, I guess, like, how do you feel like I get the feeling from you that you've kind of moved on from these old movies. Like you focus on more newer movies and pop culture, right?
Yes and no. I mean, some of these older movies, like if when they come on cable or if they're on TV, I'll certainly sit and watch them or watch parts of them. But yeah, I mean, I have my favorite films, but there are not that many that sort of fit into this genre that I would just throw on for, I got to kill 2 hours. What can I throw on in the background while I'm folding laundry or vacuuming the rug or something?
Domestic.
Well, even sometimes I'll be like, well, I'm making lunch. It's like, well, the TV's in the next room. I don't necessarily have to see it, but if it's something I'm familiar with, I want to listen to the dialogue but these kinds of movies generally aren't my go-to. It's not that I dislike them. I mean, and it's not that I don't think they're rewatchable. I think a lot of them have a lot of rewatching. Like there's a lot of value in rewatch. If you enjoy it, you're still going to laugh at the funny parts. But I don't know. For me, usually when I'm throwing on something that I'm going to rewatch, it's rarely a comedy. I find it tends to be more, it's action, it's sci-fi, it's something of that nature.
Right. Okay, so let's get into this movie. So Zapped was released on July 23rd, 1982. It was written by Robert Rosenthal and Bruce Rubin. It was directed by Rosenthal. Made just under $17 million at the domestic U.S. box office. So I like to ask this question. 1982, what do you think? We'll take a guess, Derek. What do you think was the number one film at the box office? 1982.
Geez, 82.
It was big.
Wow. I'm trying to think of like what would have won the awards that year. It was
didn't win any awards that I know of. But
no. Okay. It wasn't Jedi, right? Jedi was 83.
83, the year before.
Okay, year before, was it E.T.?
It was E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Yeah,
took in $360 million. Yeah. Number two was Raiders of the Lost Ark. Even though it came out the year before, it was still making money in 82. Rocky 3 was number 4. On Golden Pond 4 and An Officer and a Gentleman was 5.
I was almost said An Officer and a Gentleman, but I was like, no, that wouldn't have been the top movie. No. So
rounding out the top 10, there was Porky's, Arthur, Wrath of Khan, Poltergeist, and at number 10, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, believe it or not. Zapped, like I said, made $16.8 million. It was down in 52nd place, just behind The Dark Crystal. I don't know if you remember that one. That was that Jim Henson one. It was really weird.
Wasn't my fave, but I've seen it.
And in Zapped was just ahead of number 53, Quest for Fire.
Oh, Canadian film.
Yeah. So, it did okay. I don't know what the budget was. I tried to figure out what the budget was. I looked everywhere online. I couldn't find it. So
I can't imagine it was that much.
It was
like
not.
It probably
was
made money, but probably not that much money.
Yeah, it was not $16 million back in the day.
No.
Probably made it for a couple million. So they made some good money.
I mean,
on it.
Scott Baio probably commanded about $10 million back then.
Yeah, right. Well, speaking of that, let's talk about the cast a bit. We'll start with Scott Baio. Obviously, played Barney. He really exploded onto the scene in pop culture in season 5 of Happy Days because he was Chachi Arcola, Fonzie's cousin. Mm-hmm. And like most 70s sitcom characters, he had a catchphrase. Do you remember what it was on that show?
Sit on it?
No. They all said that, but he used to say wah wah wah. That was his thing. Yeah.
Dumb.
It was popular, his thing. He also tried to make a fashion statement because he wore this bandana tied around his leg. That was less popular, to say the least. But based on his popularity on Happy Days, they made a spinoff called Joni Loves Chachi, which I think you could easily argue is one of the worst TV shows in the history of the medium.
Yeah, it's a standard punchline for many jokes in these days.
Joni and Chachi moved to Chicago from Milwaukee to pursue singing careers.
Jeez.
Even though Scott Baio, the actor, can't sing a lick. So, and my God, that opening sequence that song they sing is so bad. Go look it up on YouTube. And it is just garbage. So the same year that spinoff started, Scott Baio appeared in this film, in Zapped. And the other thing about him, too, is he's been a lifelong Republican, which is fine, whatever. But in recent years, he's really embraced conspiracy theories, which is not okay, and it's really tarnished his reputation. I mean, you retweet batshit crazy memes about Sandy Hook, it's going to do it to you. So it is really, and deservedly so, I think. So his reputation has taken a real hit, we'll say, over the last couple of years. But we're going to try and focus on his work in this movie and not drill on, all this craziness now. But one thing that I did like watching this again was it reminded me how both him and Henry Winkler both made movies around the same time that had them play against type. Yeah. Because Scott Baio was cool as Chachi. He was a nerd here in Zapped. And Henry Winkler was like the epitome of cool as Fonzie. But he was a nerd in Night Shift. Mm-hmm. But neither one of them, of these movies for them, really helped their careers at all. Which I thought was interesting.
Again, looking back, you sort of oh yeah, but it's especially Night Shift for Henry Winkler. You look, because we just recently did that one on this show anyway, mm-hmm. right? And people look back on it now and go, oh yeah, I'm surprised it wasn't a bigger hit. It's well, times were different.
Yeah. So I also want to talk about Willie Aames, played Peyton. He was a little bit famous at the time because he was one of the sons on 8 Is Enough. He was Tommy Bradshaw.
Right.
And he also did this Blue Lagoon ripoff with Phoebe Cates. It was called Paradise. Instead of being marooned on a desert island, they were marooned on an oasis in the desert. And I always felt like he just got cast in that movie because he sort of looks like Christopher Atkins from the Blue Lagoon.
Right.
And I don't know if you know this, he was also the voice of the son in the cartoon Wait Till Your Father Gets Home. Remember that show?
I do. I also think he was the voice in the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon.
Oh,
he was the main guy.
He might have been.
I'm pretty sure.
Oh, very cool. So based on the success of this movie, Zapped, and the chemistry that he had with Scott Baio, they were reunited again for 5 seasons of Charles in Charge from 1984 to 1980. And showing off his acting range, Willie Aames went from being this rich, obnoxious guy in Zapped to being this brain-dead, idiotic guy in Charles in Charge. Man, when you watch Charles in Charge, you realize Willie Aames had 0 acting chops. He totally sucked. And don't just take it from me. In 1982, he was nominated not for 1, but for 2 Razzie Awards as worst actor in both in Zapped and in Paradise. So
jeez,
he wasn't all that good. Heather Thomas, we got to mention, she played Jane. She was a major pinup star in the 80s. Big time. The 70s had Farrah Fawcett, and the 80s had later 80s, I would say, had Pamela Anderson. But the early 80s, Heather Thomas was right up there as one of the pinup stars. Man, she was gorgeous. And probably best known from The Fall Guy, the TV show.
I would think so.
The TV show with Lee Majors, not that stupid movie that, last year or whatever.
You haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, that's right. You watched it last week or whatever,
I think
right?
you're going to like it.
Yeah. Although, didn't she film something for the closing credits in that movie? You watched it, you would know. I thought she did some little thing for that movie. I don't know.
Well, you'll have to watch it and find out.
Interesting career she's had, because in 1986, she was walking across a street in Los Angeles and she got hit by a car and really badly injured both her legs. And then she got stalked so bad, she ended up quitting acting.
Really?
She's done some writing. She wrote a screenplay and a novel since then, but she's entirely left acting pretty much, since then.
Didn't know that.
Felice Schachter, I want to mention too. She was Bernadette. She was a child model back in the 70s. She did over 100 commercials. Wow. And she was in the original cast of The Facts of Life.
Yeah, that's where I recognized her from right away.
But of course, when that show came out, the cast was just too big. So they pared it down to 4 girls. And she made some guest appearances.
Didn't make the cut.
Yeah, but she didn't make the cut as a regular. And then her one and only film role was here, Zapped. I actually liked her in this movie. I thought she was good. And I thought she was sort of the perfect love interest for him in this. Did you like her in this movie? I thought she was good.
I had no objections at all. Yeah. It was like we did Revenge of the Nerds a couple of weeks ago, and it was the girl that Gilbert likes. It's like, again, she was only in a couple of movies. They sort of were like, oh, well, she could be the nerdy girl in these movies. And then just like, that was it. She did a couple movies and you never saw her again. It's
exactly.
Like, I don't know why she didn't get more
Michelle
work.
Mayrink was in those ones, right? Robert Mandan, I want to mention too. He was Principal Walter J. Coolidge. Probably best known for Soap. He was in that show.
Yep.
And also he was Mary Cadret's dad on that Three's Company spinoff, Three's a Crowd.
Yep.
Remember that?
I remember him from that. And it's funny because the day when I was watching this movie last week, there was the episode of Three's Company, which was like the last episode where he's in it. And I just flicked around. I'm like, oh my God, like, look who it is. Like, what are the odds that I've watched this guy in 2 different things on the same day?
I remember that episode because Jack was going to marry Mary Cadret's character. And then at the very end, then it said Three's a Crowd. And then you knew they were spinning it off. And also that actor was in, he was also in Facts of Life. He married Mrs. Garrett at the very end of that series. Yeah. Wow. So I got some shout outs that I want to give. Multiple shout outs to some of the cast members. Okay. Muse Small. You're like, who's that? It's Barney's mom.
Oh, the mom. Yeah.
I remember her from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And also in this movie called Thank God It's Friday, which I've mentioned on the podcast before. So she stood out to me. Merrick Buttrick. He was the punk guy. Remember the guy that reads the poem? Chicks in class?
He was from Star Trek 2. He was Kirk's son. That's where I recognized him from right away.
Yes. And he was also in Square Pegs, that TV show. He died really young. He was only 29. He died from complications of AIDS. I want to mention Susan Ursity, who is my all-time biggest celebrity crush. Best known as Boof in Teen Wolf. Mm-hmm. She was in this movie. She had a really small part. Like,
I was going to say, I don't even remember seeing her.
You would she blinked and she didn't have a line in it. There was the one scene where she's outside the school and then in the final prom scene, she was like, blink and you miss her. She was there, but I was like, oh my God. And then I also want to give a shout out to LaWanda Page. She did a lot of stuff back in the 70s. I told you, me and my sons watched Different Strokes. Mm-hmm. We go up to the trailer on the weekends in the summer. And she was in Different Strokes. She was Arnold and Willis's aunt. She was trying to scam them out of money. And she was so good in this movie. She was Scatman Crothers' wife. Oh my God, I loved her. And that brings us to the main man himself, Scatman Crothers. Hands down, my favorite character in this movie was Dexter Jones. I hope you agree with me.
I don't know if he's my favorite, but I definitely enjoyed his performance.
He was great. Probably best known for The Shining, right?
I would think so. Well, I mean, his acting career, yeah.
You know, I will always remember him from the 70s Saturday morning cartoons, the Harlem Globetrotters and Hong Kong Phooey. He did voices.
I forgot he did the voices.
Yeah. Can we just talk about Scatman Crothers in this movie for a minute?
Sure.
My 2 favorite lines in this movie are both his. So the one is when he says, first comes the whiskey, then comes the women. It's the devil's double whammy. I love that line. And the other one that I really like, I like when he says, "My old lady don't let me eat salami no more."
Don't let me eat the salami anymore. Yeah.
I say that to my wife all the time. She's like, "What's that from?" Sounds like one of your movies. So so after he's had his hallucination when he gets really high, and then he's waking up and he's in the boiler room on the chair and he's still pretending to be on the bicycle. "Help me, Mr. Einstein! Help me!" Yeah.
I was like, for some reason, anytime I'm watching a documentary and they talk about Albert Einstein, I start doing that. I'm like, "Help me, Mr. Einstein!" And again, my wife looks at me and goes, "What is wrong with you?" It's just one of these random little throwaway things that just always stuck with me because I thought it was funny. He's got so many in this movie when the principal's trying to like get into the lab and he's like, "My key doesn't seem to work on this lock." Mm-hmm. And then Dexter's like, "We all seem to have that problem sometimes now, don't we?" I was like, what? And then one of my favorites, when he's at the prom, I don't know why. He's standing there with his wife and he's beside the principal and he turns to the principal and he says, "Seeing all these young pretty girls makes me feel old and ugly. But not as ugly as you," he says to the principal. And then his wife is like, "Well, ain't this a peach? Look who's talking." And he just like shoots her a sideways look. I don't know. There's so many lines in this movie. I like when during the prom when everything's going crazy and the principal and the other teacher are under the table and they come out and then he sees them and he gives them the finger over finger thing like Yeah, like shame. Oh my God, it made me laugh. It's like another one of those things that throughout the course of the movie he's like taking note of all these things so that one day he can like hold them over the principal, to like to blackmail him or something. It's pretty funny. It reminds me of in the Breakfast Club, with the janitor that sees everything and knows everything. He's kind of the same way, Okay, so let's get into this movie. I have a question for you. Why are Peyton and Barney even friends? I made a note of this. I thought that myself, and I think that was just a trope of these kinds of stories back then, where it was like the rich popular kid would often have like a nerdy friend. Like think like Saved by the Bell. Like why are Zach and Screech friends? Like that makes no sense at all. It was always like you had the one, but normally the story focuses on the popular kid and the nerd is just there as sort of the comic relief. And I like that this one was the other way around. It's like the nerd was the hero in this story and the rich guy was sort of the comic relief, just doing his outrageous stuff. I just got the sense that these two guys like probably had been friends for 15 years. Like they just seem to have this shorthand where you just, it's not like they just met this year and they hit it off. Like I got the sense that there's supposed to be this deep history that goes with them, but that was just my take. It's just weird because if you think about it, like they have nothing in common. Like Peyton's rich, or at least they mention he's rich. You never really see it all that much. Although there's that one scene when he's about to have sex with the school secretary on her desk and the camera zooms in on his designer jeans patch. That was like a major status symbol back in the 80s. And he's like really popular. At least like he must be because they voted him as prom king. So he's like a popular guy. And Barney is like this shy, quiet nerd. So I don't understand why they're friends. I mean, Peyton uses Barney for things. So that's what I was going to say. Jerk. Maybe that was it, where he's like, well, I can get him. Like again, he's helping him grow the designer weed and stuff like that. But again, if they had been friends for a while, this isn't something Barney would have been doing years ago. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong with my take. Maybe he saw an opportunity and they only recently became friends. But who knows? Yeah, I just don't know why Barney would be loyal to him as a friend. It seemed odd. But the lead actors definitely have chemistry. It's like I say, it's why a studio was willing to basically put them together again for Charles in Charge, which just was basically that whole show was just a reason to have them star in something together after the success of this movie, right? Yeah, exactly. So I always wanted to ask you this question. Could this movie get made today? Oh, absolutely. Well, they did. They remade it. I want to say like about 10 years ago on Disney. I'm sure it was cleaned up and more family friendly, less boobs. And I think it was a girl that got the powers, if I remember correctly, because I remember when I was looking for this about a year ago and I was doing internet searches, that's what kept coming up. And they're like, Zapped from, I think it was 2014. And I was like, no, I want the original. So, but in answer to your question, yes, I think they could remake this movie today. I think it would do very well because with all the superhero movies and how popular they are, there are movies that have come out in the last decade that have people with superpowers. Some of them have been sci-fi, some of them have been horror, some of them have been more serious, some of them have been a little more loosey-goosey. I don't think they've really done a really good comedy yet. Like the movie Kick-Ass has some funny parts, but it's still an action movie, but it's sort of, again, and it's based on an actual comic book. But I like this concept. It's, the guy gets a lab accident, he gets superpowers. What does he do? He uses it to win at gambling and have girls' shirts pop open. Like that's gold. 80s. That's comedy gold, man. Like, come on.
So let's discuss that. What are some of the problematic aspects of this movie, do you think?
Well, the fact that he, uses his powers to pop open girls' shirts, like, that's
right.
That's your number one right there. But and then when there's the scene where once he starts dating the girl, Bernadette, and they're making out in the lab, and he uses his powers to like move all the things off the table and put the bed on there, and then they start making out, and it's like he tries to use his power to like force her to take her shirt off, and she just like distracts him by kissing him and stuff. And it's like, again, I don't think intention was that he was doing it in a malicious way. I think, again, he was being playful, like, hey, I'm going to lift your shirt up, but it's stuff like that.
I guess like if you were looking at this movie from today's lens and you'd never seen it before, you could look at it as problematic.
Well, I think the things with Peyton, with Willie Aames' character, that's where there's more problematic. It's, he's having an affair with, I don't know if she was a teacher or
she was like the secretary.
I think she was the principal's
Yeah.
secretary or the vice principal or something. So that, obviously, the age gap and the fact that he's a student and she's a faculty, like that, you can't, like, no chance. That would definitely not be happening. And the fact that he kept taking pictures of the girls and trying to get like pictures of when they bend over, he take pictures of their butts. And then later when he has the girl come over, he takes pictures of her naked. Like, absolutely. Like there's a no-go on that one. Like, that is super problematic. Again, there are ways to make his character a little sleazy. If you were to remake it, to make his character sort of seem like he has like a sleazy side, but to do it in a way that didn't feel just so, like he's essentially violating the privacy of these women, right? And again, I don't think that they're doing anything that's non-consensual as far as being in a relationship with this kid, even if it's just for the one night stand or whatever. But the one with the teacher is a whole different story. But there are ways to get that point across in today's using it if it was made today. Back in the 80s, it's just the way it was. That was fun.
One thing of watching it this time that I just didn't pick up at the back in the day was this movie's a little bit weird. Like, there's some definite weird things going on here. The scene when he makes the model fly around his room, you can totally tell it's a Millennium Falcon. It's like turned backwards. It's got like these
the
wings
Enterprise
on it. Look at the Enterprise
at the back. Yeah, it's like, let's just take two popular sci-fi things, smush them together in a terrible way, and
then he's having that whole dream about the bridge of Star Trek with Spock and everything. Like, that was just weird. The dog, he goes toward the dog, and then remember the dog bites on it, and the teeth are like coming through. The whole thing was weird. I remember
it just seemed unnecessary.
The scene too when he's talking to his dad, and his dad's like, "It's dinner time. Come on down. You got to eat. Your mother made her specialty, Spam with cream sauce." Like, it was just weird things were going on. So I don't know. And another thing that it really struck me was the practical special effects. Because in 1982, like, even right from the opening, he's doing that experiment with those mice. It was like the effect of alcohol on diving. If you're like a scuba diver. And he's got these mice, and they're actual mice in little aqua suits with like, I don't know, like the bubble thing on their head. Yeah. I was like, what is this? Like, those practical special effects, like, now it would all be done with CGI and stuff. And back then you couldn't. And when they had the brooms cleaning up the lab and the beakers and test tubes are floating around. And then there's where I think she challenges him to like empty the air out of the gas can. And then remember, he empties all the water out of the aquarium. It was like clearly like being tipped sideways on a gimbal or something like that. Yeah. And when the guys are mooning them, and then he makes them like float through the air, and even when he stops her on the bike, like, there's just so many practical effects. You mentioned the mattress come floating into the room too. So many practical effects in this film that kind of stand out today. I don't know. Do you think they held up?
Not all of them. I think they were a product of their time, and I think the idea here is, like, know your audience. Like, the audience for this movie is probably supposed to be teenagers, specifically probably teenage boys. And I think that I remember even as a young boy watching this, like, the effects were fine. I didn't have any criticism with them as a younger person. So it's not to say that they couldn't have made them better if they wanted to and if they had money to, but I think they realized, like, if this is our audience, this is as good as it needs to be, and this is as much as we need to spend. And again, I think that's another reason why this would be right for a remake, is you have access to these new tools. You could make the special effects bigger and better. Again, if you wanted to do practical, you could. I don't think they would. I think it would be more cost effective to use a computer and use green screen so you can do a lot more stuff. But having that freedom and flexibility to do more things, I think would open up opportunities for comedy and storytelling that they maybe did not have originally, simply because they had a limited budget and they couldn't do ridiculous things with the special effects. They had to limit it to, like, straight up the girl's shirts pop open and the water gets poured out of the tank. Like, again, to your point, there are reasonable and cost effective ways to do those special effects. So
let's talk a little bit about the soundtrack. I think it's important because even when I started watching this movie, that song that they play over the opening credits just brought this wave of nostalgia over me for some reason. I don't know why, just maybe remembering it, but the soundtrack of this movie really stands out, as well as the score. Some of the, like, funky music sounds and stuff. I mean, the 80s definitely had, their own sound with the synth stuff and stuff. Mm-hmm. But did anything in the soundtrack stand out to you in any way?
So not so much for me. I mean, it sounded 80s, which was fine. I didn't, like, nothing stood out being problematic. And again, the songs were not songs that I really remembered. But I mentioned this to...
I think they were all made for the movie, I think
so, too. So yeah. I remember I mentioned this to a friend of mine who happens to be Filipino. And we were just chatting, and he's like, oh, what movies you been watching recently? I said, oh, I just watched Zapped. And then he goes, oh, I love that song. He starts singing the song. I'm like, how the hell do you know this song? And he goes, oh, this was like a huge hit in the Philippines. I'm like, really?
Which one? Like, Which one was it? Do you remember?
It was whatever the love theme was when they were making out.
Got to believe in magic.
Yeah, he knew all
magic when two people fall in love. That was popular in the Philippines.
He was telling me about the history of the song and the artist and all that. I'm like, how do you know all this stuff? And he was, I was shocked. So,
I wonder if it had something to do with, like, the budget or whatever, that they spent money on this, developing this song or buying the rights to this song. So they're like, we're playing the whole friggin' thing, because they play the whole song from beginning to end. That montage sequence when they're, like, dating and, like, apparently, like, falling in love, and it ends in them having sex. Like, they play that whole song from beginning to end. It's a long scene, you know.
Here we go. Sorry, I just cut you off. I found this. I was just looking at it. I knew I read this somewhere. So it says here, the two ballads from the film, Got to Believe in Magic and The King and Queen of Hearts, had become standards in the Philippines and recorded by dozens of Filipino artists. And in 2013, a Filipino TV show called Got to Believe ran 140 episodes, and they used the song Got to Believe in Magic was the theme song. So there you go. Yeah. It's amazing how some of these things just end up, you think they're one thing and they suddenly have a life somewhere else.
And I was just thinking, too, in that whole montage falling in love sequence, when they get done having sex, because that's how it culminates, obviously, they smoke cigarettes.
Well, that's how you know they had sex. They smoked cigarettes.
It's like a stereotype. It's like, it felt more like this is what two teenagers think you're supposed to do after sex, at least in 1982, Yeah. So there was
exactly
that. The age of the actors in most of these 80s movies, it was funny because the actors were always older than the parts they played.
Yeah, of course.
We saw this. This is the thing. Felice Schachter was the only actor that was actually in high school when they shot this movie.
Wow.
All the other actors were, like, in their 20s, And I remember there was at one point there was a shot of, like, kids coming out of class, and one of them's got a mustache. And I was like, look at that guy. He looks like he's like 30. What the hell? So any scenes that you jumped out?
Oh, yeah. I made a list. I mean.
Oh, good. Give me some of them.
Yeah. So probably the one that just right off. I mean, the two biggest ones are the prom, which we'll get into. And the other one to me was the baseball game. Like, who wouldn't use their powers to excel at sports, especially if you are not an athlete? And again, this is where you got to believe that these two guys are friends, where, obviously Peyton is already on the team and is already a superstar. And I think they maybe even say he's like the captain of the team or something. And, he has Barney use his powers to help his batting, but also to hinder the offense of the other team. Like, again, I remembered almost the entirety of this sequence from when I was a little kid. It struck me as like, yeah, of course, that's exactly what I'd do if I had powers.
I thought that scene was pretty good too.
At the very end, when the pitcher, who's clearly played by like a 40-year-old man who's supposed to be a high school student,
he looks like a teenage Jaws from Moonraker or something.
Yeah,
he
exactly.
was like weird looking, eh?
He was really weird looking, and he looked really old to be a high school student. And then at the end, where he just like sits down and cries again, as a little kid, I thought that was hilarious.
That guy had the worst form in his windup that I've ever seen in my life from a pitcher.
Yeah,
like he just does this weird windup that just kind of just lobs the ball in. One other thing, like that scene, I thought was good. It's a really long scene. Like,
yeah, it was longer than I remembered.
But I don't know if you noticed, at one point during the game, the Penguin mascot feels up the cheerleader that's standing beside him. I was like, what the hell was that? Like, holy smokes, that would caught me off guard.
Yep.
I think one of my favorite scenes was, you had mentioned already, when Scatman Crothers smells the marijuana that's burning in the incinerator, and he goes into that trance and he dreams he's like with Albert Einstein because his wife is shooting salamis at him through this cannon. Again, this movie's weird.
Help me, Mr. Einstein. Help me. Yeah.
It's so funny.
And again, as a little kid, I had the marijuana parts of this movie.
Right.
I had no understanding what that was. So I had no idea why he was having this dream. I just must have thought like, oh, well, I guess he fell asleep. Like, it made no sense to me as a little kid. But watching it this time, I'm like, oh my God, that's totally makes sense now.
I like when the teachers were sneaking into the lab too. Mrs. Bernhardt takes the principal in there, and she's like, they go through the window, and she opens up the cabinet to show that Barney's been growing marijuana, and it's not there. And she's like, there was marijuana there. I saw it. And the principal goes, he doesn't believe her. He's like, I think you smoked it, Mrs. Bernhardt. It made me laugh. But that was funny. And then they go and crawl out the window. And of course, Scatman Crothers spots them leaving.
Yeah.
He's like, he sees the guy coming out of the window with the teacher. And then the principal's like, you're going to keep this to yourself, right, Dexter? And he's like, I always do. I got a file in my head 2 feet thick about a whole lot of things that you do that I keep to myself. And I was just laughing so much. It's so funny. Also, the scene at Magic Land, they shot that at Six Flags.
I was going to say that was
Valencia.
my next one, where they get drunk at the state fair. Again, as a little kid, I didn't understand that the two guys went out, got super drunk, and then had a bet to see who could puke first. Again, as a little kid, I didn't understand that. But watching it this time, I was like, oh my God, that was totally what people that age would do. And just having I remember when he had them like speed up the teacups thing so they would spin faster. Oh, I laughed so much when I rewatched that.
Well, they each have to drink a 12-pack of beer. Now, it's American beer, Derek. So to you and me, that's what, like 4 Canadian beers, something like that.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it. I'm not a big beer guy, but yeah.
And like you say, he gets Barney to spin the ride extra fast for Robert.
Yeah.
So then Peyton takes Jane home. How can he even function? He just drank 12 beers.
Exactly. I thought the same thing. And he drives. Like no, actually, I think she drives, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Like, how can he go home with? If I just drank 12 beers, I'd be like the worst lay in the history of the world. You know, but maybe in all fairness, maybe it doesn't take 12 beers for me to accomplish that feat.
I wasn't going to say it, but you said it, and I'll agree with you.
But like,
I met your wife.
He gets her into his house, and he's trying to like set the mood, and he like puts the music on and the lights, and then he farts. I was like, what the hell? And of course, because it's an 80s movie, she likes him because she thinks he's rich.
Yeah. I noticed that, again, I noted it this time through. I guess I didn't really catch on the first time through when I was a little kid, but the fact that she's like cold shoulder to him the whole time. And then when she realizes like, oh my God, he's like assuming I found it odd that she believed everything he was saying, but assuming she actually did believe everything he was saying, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, he's rich. Then, I'm not going to close this possible door. But then she even says after, she's like, oh, he promised to take me to Hawaii after graduation. She's like, I'm not passing on a free trip, implying once the trip's over, I'll come back to see you again because you're rich and I can get something out of you.
And then in that scene, he sets the camera timer to take a picture of her nude when they're going at it. And I don't know if you picked up on it, but right when the camera flashes, you can see him, he's smiling and waving at the camera.
There's a still picture of that on the IMDb I was looking through earlier, and I was like, oh my God.
It's so inappropriate. So another thing I noticed too, there's a lot of homages in this film to other movies. Okay. Like the scene when he makes the ventriloquist dummy's head spin around in front of the priest, like it's like The Exorcist.
I assume it's from The Exorcist, yeah.
And remember when the bullies come after Barney and he's like, you talking to me? I guess so. I'm the only one here. That's from Taxi Driver, obviously.
Which, as a little kid, I had no idea, but I thought it was a ridiculous line.
And then, of course, the Star Trek thing that was going on too. So there was like all that. So this brings us to the prom scene that you mentioned. We'll come back and talk about this.
Wait, hang on. Before we do that, I liked the scene near at the very beginning of the movie, like once he first gets the powers, where they're reading their poems in class, and you've got the guy who was Captain Kirk's son, who's like the stoner guy, and he reads his poem. I literally, when that scene came on, I was able to recite the whole poem. For some reason, I just had it memorized from when I was a little kid because I just thought it was funny and stupid, and it made me laugh again this time so much. Again, it was just a dumb sequence.
It stood out to me too. It's funny that you mentioned that. The prom scene. So it feels like this entire movie just like aims toward this scene. And it's just like one big excuse to show boobs. It almost feels like they got done this film and then we're like, we need to put more boobs in it. Let's go back and reshoot some more scenes to put into that like prom scene. But I gotta say, the best part of the whole prom scene, I laughed and
laughed. Scatman Crothers again?
Oh my God. You got all these half naked girls running around everywhere. And then this black girl runs and she's got her like bra and panties on, and Scatman Crothers just grabs at her.
Yeah.
And then his wife goes, you son of a bitch. And she just tackles him into the wall. I laughed so
did I. Oh my God, yeah.
God. It was just so inappropriate, but so funny in the context of the whole film, where she's always on him and stuff. And then I don't know, he's the coach. What's he doing? Like trying to grab this teenage girl going by. It's so bad. But oh my God, that was so funny. I can't. Even just thinking about it now, it's making me laugh. Sorry.
God, again, you were talking about inappropriate scenes.
I know that was
grabbing at the student was, but it was funny. It was done in a way that was funny. And again, obviously he didn't actually catch her, which was half the joke. But and again, there's some of the scenes are just like sight gags, like when the rival boyfriend where his pants get ripped off and he's got the red like gotchi shorts on with the Rolling Stones logo with the tongue sticking out. Like, again, I didn't know what that was as a little kid because I had no idea that was the logo, and I just thought it was funny. And it made me laugh. Like it was funny.
So any closing thoughts on Zapped?
Oh, it was so much fun to go back and rewatch it. Again, it's one of these ones where you put on your 1982 nostalgia goggles and you watch it for what it was. I didn't feel it was anywhere near as problematic as like Revenge of the Nerds, which we watched a couple of weeks ago, but it was a lot of fun. And I definitely think I will rewatch this again within the next year. And after I finished watching it, I went to my app on Amazon. I took a screenshot of the movie poster and I sent it around to like all my friends from my childhood, my cousins and my brother, and all my friends who grew up with them. Like, hey guys, this cinematic masterpiece is now available on Amazon, which I know you all have Amazon accounts. So, and a bunch of them responded right away. They were like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And some of them just like, funny face emoji and stuff. So yeah, I think if you're of a certain age and you have a history with this movie, you're going to be pleasantly surprised when you go back to rewatch it. I felt it really held up well.
Yeah, I did.
I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
You want to give it a rating out of 10?
I mean, it's probably about a 6 or a 6.5, but I mean, that's even with my spin on it. Like, I enjoyed it a lot more. Like, if I said to you, I saw this movie, I give it a 6 out of 10. You're like, oh man, well, why would I watch it? I'm like, because it was dumb, but I mean, it was funny. So yeah, I'm gonna go with a 6.5.
I would go 7. I really would. As far as those 80s sex comedies go, we were talking about earlier, I think this one ranks right up there with them.
Yeah,
I thought it was good. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I think the fact that we haven't seen it in a long time helped it. I think if we had been seeing it every year, I think it would have worn off a bit. But the fact that the newness of it, I think, helps it a lot. Like newness in the sense that it hasn't been available for so long.
Yeah, we haven't seen it in forever. And a lot of these movies are like that for me, but this one was like that for everybody. So, all right, on that note, what do you say we have some
fun with Caveman?
All right, so it's my movie, so it is over to you. What do you have lined up for us to have some fun with tonight?
All right, so this movie's called Zapped, but
it is.
It's got an exclamation point on the end of it. Yes. It's not just Zapped, it's Zapped.
Right.
So there's a lot of movies that have had an exclamation point at the end of their title.
Oh my goodness.
Most of which are one-word titles, but not all of them. I'm going to give you clues, and you're going to tell me the name of the movie. And the common theme is every answer has an exclamation point at the end of it, and I want to hear it when you shout out the answer.
Okay, so I got to shout out the answer. And so what are you going to give me in terms of clues?
It's going to be the pick the flick. It's
okay, so we're going to do
the year and the synopsis, and you just got to give me the title, and the common theme is they all have an exclamation point at the end. So
in that case, first we got to play the theme song then, I guess, wouldn't we? Pick the flick. Yeah, pick the flick. You get the synopsis, then pick the flick. You get the year, pick the flick. So you're gonna give me the year and the synopsis, and I gotta guess the film, and it has an exclamation mark in it somewhere, and I have to stress it too, right?
Yes. Okay. And there's some that I know are coming, so just wait. Let me finish reading the whole thing first.
Sure.
Okay. This one's from 1996. I know it's a little outside your wheelhouse.
Okay.
Earth is invaded by aliens with unbeatable weapons and a cruel sense of humor.
Mars Attacks.
Yes. All right. This one's from 1980. After the crew becomes sick with food poisoning, a neurotic ex-fighter pilot must safely land a commercial airplane full of passengers.
Airplane.
Excellent. Yes. I figured that was a nice, easy one for you. All right. This one's from 2008. A woman invites 3 men from her mother's pasts to her wedding in hope of meeting her real father.
Is it Mamma Mia?
Sorry, is it what?
Oh, sorry. Mamma Mia!
Yes! I also would have accepted it if you had sung that lyric.
Oh, I see. Well, we don't want to do that.
Missed opportunity there.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, this one's from 2001. A poor bohemian poet in 1890s Paris falls for a beautiful courtesan and nightclub star coveted by a jealous duke.
I don't know.
Also a musical.
And from what year?
2001.
Can you maybe tell me who's in it?
Nicole Kidman.
Moulin Rouge?
Sorry.
Moulin Rouge!
Yes.
That has an exclamation mark?
Apparently, yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right. We're going in our Wayback Machine here.
I like that.
1968.
Ooh.
After being sold to a mortician, a young orphan runs away and meets a group of boys trained to be pickpockets by their elderly mentor in 1830s London.
Oh, that's a huge one. That's Oliver, or I should say Oliver.
There you go. All right. Good job. All right. This is probably the toughest one on this list because not only do I think you've never seen it, you've probably never heard of it, but you never know.
Okay.
All right. This one's from 2004.
Mm-hmm.
When a girl attending a Christian high school becomes pregnant, all of her former friends turn on her and she is ostracized and demonized. It's actually a comedy.
Oh, geez. I don't know.
It's called Saved.
Oh, okay. I don't even think I've ever even heard of it before.
Yeah, it's got...
it almost sounds familiar. Is that, for some reason, is it Macaulay Culkin in that?
Yeah. And I want to say it was Mandy Moore, the girl that's in, that was in the... one of those recent TV shows, something about the Story of Us. I think she's the mom in that. Anyway, okay. So that was Saved from 2004. So you missed that one.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that one, though.
It was quite good if you could find it. All right, the next one from 2019, so a fairly new one.
Oh.
A newly fostered young boy in search of his mother instead finds unexpected superpowers and soon gains a powerful enemy.
No idea.
It's Shazam!
Oh, jeez. Is that the one with like Shaq in it or something?
No, that's Kazam.
Oh, that's
and that one
Kazam.
might have an exclamation point.
That might have one too.
Yeah.
There's another
All
one.
right. We're going back to your comfort zone. 1986.
Okay, I like this.
Okay. 3 actors accept an invitation to a Mexican village to perform their on-screen bandit fighter roles, unaware that it is the real thing.
Is it the Three Amigos?
Sorry, was it what?
The Three Amigos?
It sounds more like a question mark, but yeah, I'll give it to you.
Okay.
All right. We're going to go to 1996.
All right.
A local Pennsylvania band scores a one-hit wonder in 1964 and rides the star-making machinery as long as they can, with lots of help from their manager.
That sounds like That Thing You Do, but I don't think it has an exclamation mark. So is it That Thing You Do?
Yes, it is.
These movies all have exclamation marks.
Yeah, they all do.
Some of these are surprising.
All right, this one. Okay, I'm just going to read you the thing. You're probably not going to get it. I'll give you a hint. The title we're looking for is the name of a song. It's also the name of this movie. The two are unrelated.
Okay.
All right. The movie was from 2016, but it takes place in 1980 Texas. A college freshman moves into an old frat house with his new baseball teammates as they party their way through the final weekend of summer.
Oh, jeez. No idea.
It's named after a Van Halen song from the 70s. With an exclamation point. 2 of them, actually.
Little Guitars?
No, good guess, though. It's Everybody Wants Some. With 2 exclamation points. All right. We got a few easy ones coming down the stretch here. Okay. 1984.
Well, I like that.
Yeah. An American rock and roll singer is invited to a cultural festival in East Germany in order to distract from a plot to destroy NATO submarines. But he accidentally becomes involved in a resistance plot to rescue an imprisoned scientist.
Top Secret!
Yeah!
I didn't even know that had an exclamation mark in it.
Oh, it does.
I love that movie, too.
Yep. All right. Here's another one from the 80s. 1988.
Okay.
An incompetent police detective must foil an attempt to assassinate a monarch.
Oh, that's Naked Gun. Naked Gun from the Files of Police Squad.
There you go. The exclamation point is at the end of Police Squad. Apparently, the TV show also had an exclamation point. All right. We're going to end this with 2 animated films that are both based on works from Dr. Seuss.
Oh,
the first one is from 2008.
Okay.
An elephant struggles to protect a microscopic community from his neighbors who refuse to believe it exists.
Is that Horton Hears a Who?
It is. And the last one is a super easy one. 1966, Dr. Seuss. A grumpy hermit hatches a plan to steal Christmas from a happy nearby village.
How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Yes, all right.
I didn't even know that had an exclamation mark on it either. Oh, my God.
No, there were lots of them.
So many movies. I was thinking, for some reason, the one that came to mind when you mentioned this was, I remember a movie back in the 50s or something that was Faster Pussycat Kill Kill.
Sure. Again, I tried not to pick movies that I was not familiar with, or that at least I didn't think you might not be familiar with. So, yeah. But no, I was surprised. I did a couple internet searches, and I was like, one of them was like, here's the top 120 movies. I'm like, oh my God. Like
that many. Another one that comes to mind, too, was in the 70s. Oh, God. I feel like that was an exclamation mark, too.
Well, it probably did.
That was a
I don't
pretty
remember
good
seeing
movie,
that on the list. Yeah, I should have put that on there. So,
oh, now you got me thinking. All right. So, so next time we come back, we've got to do a movie that you get to pick. So do you have something queued up? What are we going to watch?
Since our next episode is going to drop on Halloween,
I
think we need to do a scary movie.
Oh, that's a
you know me
idea.
though. I'm not a big horror guy, but this is like the granddaddy horror movie from the 80s that everyone knows and everyone except you has seen. Great special practical effects. We're going to watch An American Werewolf in London.
Oh, wow. And it's so funny because, I'm the 80s guy. I've never seen that film.
I remember you had said that and I had it noted down. And then when we were chatting earlier and you're like, oh, it's your turn to pick a movie. I looked at my list and I'm like, you know what? Perfect timing. So it's available on a couple of the streamers.
Okay.
I know it's on Tubi for sure, and I think the other one it was on was Amazon Prime maybe, and even here in Canada it's on the CTV app. So there's lots of places to find it. You might have to watch a few commercials, but there's yeah, I don't think any of those channels will edit out anything, like censor it in any way. So no, I want you to give that a viewing, and we'll come back next week and watch it. And yeah, let me know what you think.
I am on board to do that. That sounds good. So American Werewolf in London next time out for Halloween. We will do that. And until then, I'm Chris McBrien. On behalf of myself and Derek Myers, we want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.